Hi, everybody. Welcome to another Guitar interview. Today, it's all about the art of ambient guitar, and I'm joined by the master, the current YouTube master of ambient guitar, Mr. Chords of Orion himself, Bill Venzel. Bill, how are you?
I am well. Nice to be here. Thank you so much, Ray. Appreciate
No,
it.
you're very, very welcome. I've followed your channel for a few years now, so this has been coming up for a long time for me wanting to talk to you, so this is going to be loads of fun. So, I'm thinking, so that everybody watching at home is all on the same page as we begin our conversation.
Mhm.
How would you personally define ambient guitar?
Ambient guitar is an amorphous thing, and I think it means different things to different people. I would say ambient guitar is more than anything else. It's an ethos of how you would approach and play the guitar versus a genre of music like ambient music. So you could play ambient guitar while playing ambient music. You could also play ambient guitar while playing some of the most popular rock songs in the entire world over all of history and anywhere in between. So it's more of an ethos, I think,
Excellent.
and utilizing, it's electric guitar. Well, it could be acoustic guitar, but utilizing perhaps different effects to create a space around the guitar.
Mm. Okay, okay. I like the idea of it being an ethos because it is quite hard to define. Even, if someone were to go onto the Chords of Orion page and check out three or four different videos of yours, you're going to get
Mhm.
quite a lot of variety, a lot of different sounds, but there is an approach there. And I'd like to get back to that in a wee second. But before we do that,
Sure. Hmm.
your own personal musical story, what brought you towards ambient guitar?
So, as you can tell, I'm 29 years old. No, I've been around for quite some time. As a kid, I started playing guitar, and don't worry, I'll make this quick.
All good.
But as a kid, I started playing guitar, and I was always drawn to what you might think of as more ethereal guitar parts and even more ethereal rock styles of music. So I'm thinking like way, way, way old school music, for example, like the Moody Blues, and then later on Pink Floyd and other bands like that. So that was always an interest of mine. When I was college age, though, I got involved in an old school prog rock band. And so I played in that band from the late 70s to the early 90s. And I incorporated a lot of what I would now call ambient guitar techniques into what we did back in the day. And I once that band broke up, and it mostly broke up because most of us got married and started having kids. I didn't, yeah, I never stopped playing, but it was more just of a personal pursuit at that point. But when I started Chords of Orion, it was I have to say, it was partly in response to hearing some newer, younger musicians and them actually using the term ambient guitar, which I had never used prior to that. But I thought, oh, they're doing stuff I've been doing for the last 30 or 40 years. Cool. So,
Yeah. So then that brought you up until this kind of like re I wouldn't say like refinding the sounds or whatever, but it's like reclassifying it and
oh,
now
definitely. I would definitely agree. I had kind of moved mostly to acoustic guitar, and in fact was really kind of focused on fingerstyle, Celtic styles of music, and certain other related styles like that. So for me, kind of just the precursor to the Chords of Orion YouTube channel. And then obviously on into that was kind of me re-engaging with electric guitar in a major way.
okay. And
Yeah, yeah.
uh so you've re-engaged with the electric guitar and you've kind of come back to these techniques that came from prog, which is awesome. We might delve into that. Um
Hmm.
then obviously most of us have come across you on YouTube, so I wonder where did that little jump, that catalyst or the signifying moment from being a back to playing a guitar to being a YouTube person directly on ambient guitar, how did that start?
Yeah, I'd like to say it was something, I had a brainwave, or my life changed, and all of a sudden YouTube was, you know, some spiritual thing or something crazy like that. But actually, what happened was, as I was kind of re-energizing on electric guitar and kind of revamping what I was doing, actually, one of my daughters pointed a band out to me, and uh, I thought, okay, the band's okay, but the guitarist caught my ear, so to speak, and I'm going to leave names out of it because that particular guitarist has changed a lot. But
Okay.
he actually did for about a year a an online music marketing course, and I thought, oh, I think I need to take that. And it was like $50 US. It was pretty cheap. So I took that and it really answered a lot of questions. But one of the things he recommended, and this was back in late 2012, early 2013, was start a YouTube channel. So I started a YouTube channel as a way to market the music that I had released, which was not a lot at that point, but the music I was also going to release. But over time, it's kind of turned into its own thing. So now I kind of view it as just part of my artistic output. Yeah, I view it in a more holistic way, if that makes sense.
It does. It does. It makes a lot of sense. And we'll come back to YouTube, but the ambient
Yep.
guitar thing kind of befits a YouTube audience in a lot of ways because, I mean, even there's my own practices when I listen to Cause of Orion, but there's when you read the comments, there are a lot of people who are studying or they need to relax or they need to do all sorts of activities that aren't necessarily directly engaging in music listening, but they still want this atmospheric response. And I think that's one of the primary services of ambient music.
Yeah, I would agree with you. And I just had a light go out here. Let's see if I can get it back on. There we go. Oh,
Mm.
yeah. Now you can probably see me better. Yeah, I totally agree with you on that. And I don't know where music or where YouTube falls itself, not YouTube Music, right? The
Sure.
music service, but actually YouTube itself. But I do know that back when I first got started, it was generally considered to be the world's largest music platform through the use of video. So I would assume it's still up there. So
Mm.
many, many, many people come to YouTube to actually listen to music. And there are a lot of channels out there that are dedicated to ambient styles of music for relaxing, for meditation, for sleep, for all types of things. So I'm not surprised that some of what I do is kind of appealed to that audience that's looking for that type of music.
Yeah, sure, sure. And when you started the channel up, I mean, you were saying it was kind of almost like part of that course just suggested now do this. So, and it
Yeah,
became a holistic thing for you. But did you have any particular expectations about how far your channel might go in terms of popularity?
no, I didn't. I didn't really. The If you were to go back, and I'm not recommending that you do, but if you were to go back and look at my oldest videos, I think like many YouTubers, you start from a very kind of primitive place, and my channel has not ever really gone viral as a whole channel. There's been a couple of videos that have really that are rather large, but it's been for me, it's been more like a slow burn in terms of growth. So, but no, I did not expect it to do what it's done.
Yeah, yeah, perhaps.
I'm thankful, but it was certainly unexpected.
Of course, of course. I wonder whether maybe that kind of I wonder whether maybe an audience can sense the lack of some people can be very desperate for likes and it might sometimes work against them, whereas you seem to just be kind of on your mission regardless, and that maybe is an attractive thing for an audience.
I do think it's important in the YouTube space. Actually, I think it's important in the general music space as a musician to identify an audience that you are creating either the music for or the videos for, or actually any kind of art as
Mm,
an artist in general. in particular, I think in today's world, many artists, certainly many artists my age that came out of the years when I was younger, really wanted to build this mysterious persona around themselves, right?
Sure.
And I think we can look back and see that some of those artists, that was just a marketing kind of activity, right?
Mm,
But I think people liked that in the past. I don't think people like it as much today because of how much content is out there. And I hate to use that word content, but how much content is out there. We're being bombarded with so many things. We don't have time for mystery anymore.
mm.
And in some ways, I think that's a shame, but I do think it's a reality. So having kind of understanding who you're making your art for, I think is a really important thing. And
Mm.
then, and to your point, sticking to your mission.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's kind of one and the same, I suppose, to some degree. Um, so the actual art itself, ambient guitar, for me, I mean, and I'd love to know your thoughts. That's why we're chatting. But I feel like it's
Sure.
a different headspace to, for example, and no disrespect to any other genre because they're all great, but it's not like kind of going through the blues or, playing the metal riffs or practicing the tapping. It's a whole different kind of there are limitations involved and there are well, what do you think about that? It is a different headspace, right?
I would agree. So I think so. If we think about ambient guitar in a more ambient genre perspective,
Hmm.
which is kind of what I tend towards sometimes, but not all the time, right? Sometimes. I would say it is certainly less about melody and rhythm and actually more about what I would call texture.
Yeah.
So this would be the layers of sound that are being produced. And it is it, it does tend to be more subtle. So if you're not listening for some of the changes in texture, you may end up thinking that the musician just played the same thing for 10 minutes straight or whatever it might be.
Sure.
But it's not really the case. It's just that the changes are much more subtle than in other styles or even other techniques of music and musicianship.
And when you've got that type of emphasis on texture, versus you mentioned versus maybe not so much melody being the key factor, although of course it plays a part.
Mhm.
You're when someone wants to practice melody, they'll maybe practice scales or modes or chord harmony and all those kinds of elements. When you are approaching the instrument, or should I say the music, through the guitar an ambient way, is a lot of that homework more about developing textures and developing an understanding of how to create a sonic.
Right, right. So you're raising, I think, a really great point. So there's, to me, that's two things, right? So one is, can you play your instrument,
Right.
regardless of genre or technique? And I happen to be of the opinion that even if you are approaching ambient guitar, it's very important to learn how to play the instrument. And to this day, when I practice, a lot of times I'll sit down and just practice the acoustic guitar. Strip away all the electronics, strip away everything else, and just play the guitar and work on left hand and right hand technique. I don't think any of that goes away or should go away
Mm,
because all of those techniques, your sense of harmony, melody, and rhythm, actually all feed into the notion of texture as you're creating the music. So that's kind of where I'm coming from. I've seen comments occasionally on some of my videos. Oh, this is great. You don't have to learn how to play guitar, but I would respectfully disagree. I think there's a depth to whatever you're doing that you can only get by mastering the instrument and independently of the style. But then, to your point, the second thing is the texture itself. Yeah, I think really working with that and understanding if you are using effects, for example, really understanding what they do and how they do their thing in conjunction with other pedals to create an overall texture that you're going for.
Yeah. So having some sort of a practical understanding of things like, you know, how much you're going to need out of a looper or how your tails of your delay are going to die and all these things, that's actually going to be an important part of the kind of the tin of the paint that you're choosing to paint with, right?
Yeah, oh, totally, totally. In particular, if you're using delays that are long delays, you've you need to understand how those delays are going to interact with each other as you play. In particular, if like me, you're more improvisational,
Mhm.
you need to know that a note that you played 20 seconds ago is still going to be hanging out. And if you play an incorrect note, it's going to sound really bad.
Yeah, again and again until it finally fades
Again
away.
and again. Yeah. And yeah. When I talk to younger musicians outside of the ambient guitar realm, I'll say, hey, one of the great things about music is that if you make a mistake, it's gone. But that's not true with ambient styles of music.
It comes back to get you. Now,
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
that brings us quite nicely onto the subject of the gear because,
Hmm.
as you say, ambient music can be all sorts of things. It is an ethos, but predominantly, and let me not speak for you, but on my own behalf at the moment, I tend
Hmm.
to think of it as being heavily affected guitars with a lot of ambience and, maybe a certain type of, maybe you need a whammy bar, maybe you need a certain type of pickups. So why don't we start with
Hmm.
your preferences for, let's say, an ambient guitar? And I know you've played a bunch, but what type of things do you prefer for that type of art?
I would say that my preference is for a guitar that I would use in ambient styles of music or with ambient guitar techniques. Uh, I would say that for me, the main thing is well, how geeky do you want to get on this?
This, you can be as ridiculously geeky as you possibly can
Great.
be.
Okay. So I would say for me, the main thing is lower output pickups.
Hmm.
So a lot of guitars I see, um, especially in the humbucking arena, tend to have higher gain pickups, and that's how they're marketed. Hey, you got a lot of gain, a lot of clarity, and in many cases, they're really designed for higher gain styles of music, which is not a bad thing, right? It's just a
Sure.
thing. But I do think you lose a lot of subtlety with those types of pickups.
Mhm.
And so whether it's a P90 style or a single coil or a humbucker, I generally am going to go for a lower output type of pickup.
Sure.
And the other the other thing that is very important to me are the controls, so the volume control and the tone control. I actually have done it's been a number of years, but there's a couple of older videos that I posted on that topic, and being able to manipulate the tone of the guitar through the volume and the tone control. I very rarely have the tone control turned all the way up or wide open. It's
Oh,
typically it's typically at five or less if you want to
ah,
use a number. Yeah.
sure, sure.
And when I go into a high for what would be for me a high gain mode, that tone knob goes all the way down. It's
Really?
all the way, yeah, all the way down. So I think that's really important. Having pickups that are lower gain, they don't have to be like at the bottom end, but lower gain that react well with the volume and tone controls on the guitar.
Right.
As I also typically prefer, for standard guitar, I typically prefer a 25 and a half inch scale. I do have a few guitars that are the quote Les Paul scale, and they're
Hmm.
fine, but I do typically prefer that with taller frets because I can. Part of my vibrato style is actually vertical. So if you think of a scalloped fingerboard, I'm not sure that I really like that, but I
Hmm.
do like having a higher fret so I can manipulate the string vertically as opposed and in addition to horizontally.
Ah, you mean like actually applying more pressure between your thumb and the fingerboard itself rather
Correct.
than moving it? Got
Yeah.
you. Got you.
That's always an ongoing thing as I play. I'm always varying finger pressure to to help create the phrasing that
Yeah.
with whatever I'm playing. And that's true also even outside of it. For me, that's true no matter what I'm playing. Acoustic guitar, I do the same thing.
That's
Just
interesting. That's one
play what I
element of
do.
your playing I never picked up on, so I'm going to pay attention to that.
It's pretty subtle. It's pretty subtle, and I'm not sure. I think where I first started thinking about it was when John McLaughlin, way back in the day, kind of started. It's kind of in his Shakti. I don't know if you're familiar with John McLaughlin
Oh, I
back in
do,
the
of
70s.
course.
Yeah, with his group Shakti, he had a couple of guitars created with scalloped fingerboards and talked a lot about the vertical aspect, which is more like sitar,
Hmm.
in terms of creating phrasing technique as you play by varying vertical pressure on the strings. So I
That's
think that's where I'd have to go back and really think about it. But I think that's where some of that early thinking from my part came. And then as what else makes a good guitar for ambient music from my perspective would also be longer scale guitars. I use baritone guitars quite a bit.
yeah, I
So
noticed that. Yeah.
yeah, I do a lot of down tuning. I do have a couple of guitars that I put heavy. They're standard gauge or standard scale length, and I put heavy gauge strings and tune them down. But for true down tuned playing, I prefer baritone because it's got the longer scale length. The tension of the string stays up to, I think, where the tonal quality is better than a lower tension string
Sure.
sounds tuned
Yeah.
down.
See, when you mentioned there about having a heavier set of strings on a standard scale length guitar and then down tuning them, does that present, does that make your, I'm going to call it your vibrato technique, the one you were just mentioning, the vertical one, does that make it sort of like easier because of the tension difference, or does that actually make you sound kind of more out of tune?
It doesn't really change it because what I do when I down tune a standard scale length guitar, I actually use there's a couple of online string tension calculators.
Oh,
So I will look at the target tuning that I'm going for, calculate what the tension calculate what the tension is for the relative standard tune. Let's say it's just standard tuning, right?
hmm,
E A D G B E, right?
sure.
Now let's say I'm tuning down to what I would call C sharp standard. So I'm tuning down a minor third.
Hmm.
So I'll look up the tension for the standard tuning on whatever guitar I'm playing, um, and then use the tension calculator to determine what the appropriate gauges of the strings would be if I tune down to C sharp, so I maintain that same tension level.
Right, right,
I
right.
don't like floppy strings, in
No
other
one
words.
does. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Would you
I
be
think,
a normal
yeah,
like 10 to 46 guy if it was in sort of standard tuning?
yeah, I use 10 to 46 in standard tuning.
Okay.
The nine, I really can't go any lower. It's too, I guess maybe I'm too heavy handed or whatever. It just doesn't work for me.
Doesn't work for you. Fair enough.
No.
Fair enough. Now, ambient essentials, we've got the guitar out the way. I would love to know your thoughts on, because of course you've used loads and loads of different delays, different
Hmm.
reverbs, modulations, but
Sure.
rather than a particular model, and absolutely don't mind if you say this is the one I like, but it's
Hmm.
more like qualities. Like, for example, is it a plate reverb you might like, or is there like a kind of cavernous one? Or so let's take reverb to begin with. What do you look for in reverb?
So to me, reverb is a secondary. I don't always use reverbs.
Okay.
So delay is primary. And what I, so for my setup, once I hit time-based delay or time-based effects, whether it's chorus, reverb, delay, whatever it might be, I move from a mono signal path to a stereo signal path. That's a that's a that's a very important preference for me since I'm typically playing solo guitar.
Yeah.
If I was playing in a band, it would probably be different. So the quality of the reverb or the delay pedal would be first and foremost, it's got to be stereo and it's got to have a good stereo quality about it. Um, Delays, my ideal delay pedal is something that ideally would have a setting where it doesn't have to be a dedicated dual delay line, but a setting where I can do at least dual delays. And I will mention one delay pedal that I really like. I've used a lot on the channel. It's the TC Electronic Flashback triple delay.
Sure.
So that's three discrete delay lines, and they can also be set up to a 7-second delay. So for me, that's like an ideal kind of delay pedal. But there are many others that fill the bill too.
Sure.
But that's what I look for in a reverb. It's a secondary device, secondary effect for me. I normally look for reverbs to fill in the space a little bit.
Hmm.
Sometimes I'll go for over the top reverb, but sometimes if you listen to some of my music, it's not really from a pedal perspective. There's not really much reverb going on. But I do like I do not typically like spring reverbs, but I do like halls, plates, rooms.
Sure.
Shimmer, okay, from time to time, but shimmer can be so overdone and over the top sometimes. I also really like pitch shifted reverbs and
Mhm.
delays for that matter.
Sure. Okay,
They're
awesome.
nice. So
And there's one important part, one important pedal, and it doesn't really sound like anything, but of course it's the volume pedal. And
mhm.
there are so many volume pedals out there, and they have the different treadle, the different speed, the different, what for you are you looking for ideally in a good volume pedal?
Yeah, volume pedal is key is a critical component
Yeah.
for what I do. And so a couple of things, and I know this is controversial, so I don't know if you're going to post this where people can comment, so you may get a comment or two on it.
Okay.
I know I do. Um, One of my preferences in volume pedals is to have an active circuit versus a passive volume pedal. I think, and the part of the reason for that is typically a volume pedal with an active circuit is going to be buffered electronically.
Mhm.
And for a more complex signal path, I think in my experience, it works better to maintain the quality of the tone of the guitar that's
Mhm.
coming through the signal path. Also, in particular, optical circuits like a Morley pedal, they don't wear out.
Yeah.
I've got I've got a Morley pedal that's 25 years old, and it's great. It's one of my favorite pedals. So I expect it to be around for another 25 years. I don't know for sure, but that's my. I have a strong preference for that. I know there are some fine sounding passive volume pedals out there, but that's just my preference. The other preference that I have is the shape of the swell.
Mm.
A lot of people prefer what would be, I would call an audio taper. So it would follow the taper of an audio tapered potentiometer, where it's designed to more follow how we perceive um, quiet to loud as we turn the knob and where it falls in the range.
Sure.
But I typically prefer a linear taper, which gives you more, it tends to give you more of the volume swell at the beginning of the travel of the pedal.
Yes.
And that works better for me, it works better for fast volume swells.
Yeah, understood. And would that also apply to, for those who aren't so they don't know this about it, that's how we would talk about the capacitors in a guitar's volume as well. You can get logarithmic, you can get audio. So
Yeah.
would you prefer that in your guitar as well? That same type of performance?
Ye- yeah. I need to think about the last time I replaced pots in a guitar. I don't do as many volume swells with the volume knob itself, but Yes, I would definitely prefer a swell towards the beginning
Mm,
of the travel of the volume knob versus the end.
yeah.
And one of the tricks I really like for guitar. Do you mind going to guitar volume swells
No,
for a
let's
minute?
do it. Let's do it.
Okay, yeah. One of the techniques I really like is one you can use with a guitar that has traditional standard Les Paul
Yep.
type of wiring, where you've got the two volume knobs and the two tone controls, but it's got to be the traditional wiring. And that is if you put the pickup selector in the middle position, again, standard two humbucker configuration. And then if you can reach the neck volume control with your pinky finger,
Yep.
when you turn it all the way down, even with the pickup selector in the middle, it it turns the volume all the way off.
Right.
And then if you just move that volume control just a little bit, it brings up the bridge pickup all the way. So it's a very fast swell.
Oh, cool. I didn't know that.
Yeah, yeah. For some reason it's not well known. So there's a guitar player named Phil Keaggy
Okay.
who's, gosh, he's probably in his early 70s now. Phil, if you're younger, Phil, forgive me if I'm wrong, but
Sorry,
he's
Phil.
older. He's older than me. I'm pretty sure he's in his 70s, but he is one of the most amazing guitar players, I would say, of the 20th century.
Oh, wow.
And that's I learned about that technique from a guitar player article in which he was being interviewed a long, long time ago.
Amazing. Amazing. Well, that's someone for us all to check out if we haven't heard him. Um, the one before we leave the world of effects, I suppose the one that I think is probably the most prominent to most people's, or at least most people who know about Robert Fripp, I guess,
Yes.
looping devices, right? The loopers are so useful, but there are so many ways to engage a looper, and there's so many ways to get it right and to get it wrong. What
Hmm.
again, if you have a favorite looper, and please do let us know, but what kind of things are important, like times and features for you for a looper?
Yeah, so I'm glad you mentioned Robert Fripp. He's one of yeah, I'm heavily influenced by Robert Fripp for sure, and his historic looping style, I'm sure as you know, is referred to as Frippertronics, and really Frippertronics at its core is just a longer delay. Okay, so there is more to it than that, but the core of it is just a longer delay with feedback. And of course, he achieved it with dual reel-to-reel tape decks. You know, we don't need to get into all that right for this conversation, but it does play into modern looper pedals and my preferences. So I don't do song-based looping,
Mhm.
like where I have a chorus and a verse
Sure.
and I flip back and forth. So some of the loopers that are more focused on that are less useful for me. I do when I loop, it's more in the tradition, I'll call it, of Frippertronics.
Yeah.
So for a looper for me, a good looper for me is one that has a loop decay control, so that I can create a loop and then as I overdub, the layers slowly fade out on whatever time frame I'm interested in.
Sure.
I also really like loopers that have more than one loop
Yep.
that I can control. So a good example is the TC Electronic Flash or Ditto X4
Yep.
is one of my personal favorites. It just because it kind of fills those requirements for me.
Yeah, yeah. Given that long delay times, we're kind of under the tyranny of the longest. The first loop that you make is as long as your looping is going to be in that regard when it comes to looping technology. Do you ever find yourself running out of time?
No, no. Well, I guess it depends on the looper, right?
Yeah.
So I don't know that I've ever done more than a 1 minute loop. And a looper like the Ditto can I don't know I don't remember how long it can go 15 minutes. I
Oh,
forget
wow.
what it is. It's long,
Okay.
way longer than I would go.
Fair enough. Fair enough. Um, if you see me looking down, by the way, Bill, I've got my little notes here of what I want to ask you. And one of them, of course, is sustain. And sustain is a perennial with us guitar players, whether it's ambient or whether it's, you know, prog or heavy metal, any of
Hmm.
these styles, we all want more sustain and we all want more ways of doing it. And there are several ways of achieving it. For ambient guitar, where, it might be you want a kind of long cello or violin style note that just keeps going, but without it being a repeat. What's your preferred method or indeed technology for achieving sustain?
A couple things. One is just basically, I always have a compressor on.
Hmm.
So I do think I prefer to, and it's interesting, I never used a compressor early on. Maybe the last 20 years or so, I really have been using them regularly. So that's an always on pedal for me so that I've got more of the body of the guitar sound, regardless of the length of the sustain. I just have more body available in the tone of the guitar itself. Sustain also for me comes through the use of distortions into delays,
Right.
and you can really control an apparent sustain that way. But if we're talking about generating a tone on the guitar and actually sustaining the tone from the guitar itself, for me that would have to be the Heat Sound EBO,
Hmm.
which I use quite frequently.
Yeah. Yeah. With all of these different methods within the umbrella of ambient guitar, what I what I would love to ask you,
Hmm.
it's more of an attitude thing than anything else, I suppose. But like you play the EBow, you have to give up certain other techniques with your right hand, for example, because you're holding onto the EBow. Uh,
Hmm.
with volume swells, you lose the pick attack or whatever else. What I'm getting at is the idea of limitations, and certainly looping is a limitation. Whenever you create that first loop, everything else is a slave to it, really.
That's
Um,
correct. Yeah, yeah, sure.
so I'm thinking, rather than limitations got a kind of negative connotation to the word. I wonder, are these things actually quite artistically and even like, emotionally rewarding things to work with?
Yes, I like limitations. So we have in the current world of music and in particular in recording, we have unlimited options.
Mm.
And I actually don't think that's a good thing. I think uh, artistic creativity can actually blossom within the context of limitations. So, we're talking about the EBow. Yes, I can only play one note at a time, but it forces me to think about melody at that point, or to think about creating chordal structures one note at a time and creating them in a layered perspective.
Mm.
So I actually like that a lot. I do get people asking me, well, why don't you use a Sustainiac?
Hmm.
And I'm not opposed to using a Sustainiac, but it's a very different, um, I would say it's a very different instrument than the EBow is. So
Mm.
they're two different things, right? And they both have limitations. I talked about this. I did a number of years ago. I did a how to create an ambient guitar EP in 6 weeks. So it
Nice.
was like a challenge, and it was kind of cool. I had a number of people kind of. I was creating my own EP, and I had a number of people kind of create with me as I kind of walk through on a week by week basis. And one of the first things I said was, "Hey, we need to figure out what our limitations are going to be for this EP." So I kind of laid out what my limitations were going to be. Here is the box that I'm going to play in for this EP. I'm not going to go outside of this box,
Yeah.
and I'm going to be creative within in this box. So I actually think it's a very important thing.
Yeah.
I mean, guitar itself is a very limiting instrument, for example, compared to a keyboard. But I think within the limitations of guitar, the expressiveness can be quite significant.
Yeah. That's kind of the trade-off, isn't it? Um,
Mm-hmm.
and I guess with unlimited options, you can imagine an architect if he just put up a
Right.
building with every style he ever liked, it would be horrendous.
Yeah, what's that phrase? Analysis paralysis.
There you go.
Right.
Exactly.
So even when I record, I typically I won't say I always do, but the majority of the time I use a pedal board with it set up in a particular way, whatever sound I'm looking for, and I print that sound as I record it, and that way I can't go back and change it.
Yeah.
it's what's done is done, right?
That's the performance.
The best I can do is edit it. Well, I'm not chopping it, but I can EQ it, whatever I'm going to do with it. Maybe add another little simple track to it, but I'm not changing what I played. The performance is the performance,
Yeah.
whatever it is.
Yeah, yeah, no, I understood, understood. One thing I actually glossed over earlier that I wouldn't mind going
Hmm.
back to was the idea of a lot of people, I mentioned they use your music when they are studying, relaxing, meditating, creating art, all these reasons. And it made me think prior to talking to you about the reasons why people even play guitar in the first place. And a lot of it is for therapy, and a lot of it is to provide some sort of catharsis in their life or all those other things. And
Hmm.
when I watch the Chords of Orion performances, it seems to me that there's a real meditative element that you're taking part in. Would I be right about that?
Oh, I would agree for sure. There's a couple things about music, and well, there's one thing about music in general that I think is really important. Um, this is my own personal belief. I believe music is, in particular, instrumental music.
Hmm.
Instrumental music communicates between humans non-verbally. Like if we were in the same room and I played something in front of you, I would be speaking to you. I couldn't tell you what I said because it's intrinsically nonverbal
Yeah.
and it doesn't translate into words in our brains, but it is communicating. And I think, in my opinion, it communicates on a very deep level. Um, Also, from my own personal life, I all music for me has a very spiritual aspect to it.
Hmm.
I am a kind of a traditional old school Christian, so I believe in that old school thing of humans being created in the image of God.
Sure.
And if God is creative, then we are creative. So we're exercising, we're in being creative, we're exercising an aspect of the way that we were created.
Hmm.
So for me, art is always spiritual, if that makes sense.
Does makes loads of sense. And
Yeah, yeah.
although I'm probably not qualified to talk about it, it does remind me of something I just read last week about certain note clusters that Mozart used to write that have direct uh, emotional kind of like religious
I
effects on the
wouldn't
human.
I wouldn't be surprised. I'm not familiar. I'll have to go look that up, but yeah, I wouldn't be surprised. I think of even someone like someone like Devin Townsend, if you're familiar with him.
He's a good friend, in fact.
Oh, good. You know Devin. Well, then you know much better than I that in addition to the broad scale Devin Townsend project types of works that he does, there is a very intimate, more spiritual aspect of what he does. Right. So
Hugely so, hugely so.
yeah, yeah. So I don't think it's all that uncommon, right, for different people. And of course, we're all coming from different, maybe religious or spiritual perspectives, or even folks who are not religious. I think in many cases, have some deeper motivation behind the art that they're producing.
Yeah, like even maybe seeking something, and to me, the improvisational, you've got your effects ready and you've got your idea, and you're plunging off the cliff with your music.
Mhm.
It is a searching, and I wonder whether that's the type of person who's searching for all kinds of meaning in all kinds of ways in their life, and that's just one facet of it.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. I think that that is a way that music, regardless of style, can definitely function in
Yeah.
someone's life. Since we're talking about it, it does remind me. There's a song. The last song on my album, Anodyne, is called "Sleep, Sleep, Beauty Bright," and it's about 30 minutes long. And that's actually the full piece, unedited piece, is about 42 or 43 minutes long, and it is. There's nothing else added. It's just a looped with the Ditto X4, actually. It's just a looped piece that's largely EBow. And that's one of my favorite pieces because I remember how I felt when I played it. It was a very spiritual experience for me personally as I played that song. So that I don't know that I'll ever forget that. Maybe I will when I'm 90 if I make it that far. Uh,
That's
but yeah,
fantastic.
yeah, it was very, for me, it's very. I don't know that anybody else even likes the piece, but for me, it's one of the more meaningful pieces I've ever done.
Fantastic, fantastic. Well, I'm sure everybody watching this will check it out after they're done with this to see
Yeah, they'll
how they.
stop it after about 3 minutes and go, "Okay, I get that," but that's okay. That's cool.
Yeah, you never know. You never know.
That's right.
Um, so briefly going back to YouTube for a second,
Hmm.
you have been at it for a long time and you've got very successful, popular site, and that isn't random, nor is it necessarily something that there's a roadmap for. But do you have any tips about anybody watching this today who wants to build their own audience on YouTube?
Yeah. So I kind of alluded to it a little bit earlier in the conversation, but let me expand on it just a little bit. I won't
Thank you.
go too crazy, but I think the way YouTube, well, I think it's similar to building an audience for your music in some ways. I think the first thing to realize is that whatever you're doing, let's just limit it to YouTube videos right now, whether it's music or whatever. But the first thing to realize is that nobody cares about what you're doing.
Okay.
It's like the hard truth, right?
No.
It's like nobody cares. And so I think the idea, but on the other hand, YouTube has, I think at last count, 2.7 billion people that watch YouTube every month. Not every year, but every month.
It's huge.
2.7 billion people. So a third of the world's population watches YouTube every month. So, what are the chances that out of those 2.7 billion people, there would be an audience for whatever you do? It's actually pretty good.
Pretty good, yeah.
It's pretty good. So, um, the as far as YouTube goes, YouTube, they say this and I believe them. They're not trying to promote YouTube channels, they're trying to find videos that people want to watch.
Okay.
So, having, again, going back to that, the kind of person you're making your art for. So, if you want to make it less personal, your target audience, if you want to use that phrase, but who is that person that you're creating your stuff for? And I would even say, think about who that person is. Maybe give that person a name, and
Hmm.
think about what they're like. What do they like? What kind of music do they like? What are their struggles in life? How old are they? What part of the world do they live in? It's really helpful to kind of understand that, and then create your videos for that person, and
Okay.
only for, like, my person is name. I'm not going to go through the whole thing, but my person's name is Chris.
Okay.
Okay, I'm an American, right? So I picked an American name, but so I got a guy named Chris, and of course he's a guy because I'm a guy, right?
Okay.
So and I kind of went from there, and so really in the back of my head, I make all my videos for Chris.
Wow, that's such a cool idea. Does that allow you to make creative decisions that are otherwise
Hmm.
you'd maybe kind of spend too much time wondering about?
Right, exactly. And then I think it's very important with YouTube to have, for your channel to have a focus. A
Mhm.
lot of people say, "Well, I just like to make videos about whatever I want to make videos about," and there's nothing wrong with that. That's a very valid way to create. But if you want to build an audience, audiences when they come to your stuff, if they've seen your stuff before, they have a certain expectation.
Mhm.
And if you're all over the place in terms of your topics of your videos, people don't know what to expect. And they're like, hey, wait a minute. I came to Bill's channel for an ambient guitar video, and here he is showing me how to make spaghetti sauce. What's up with that? Right? So that doesn't work real well.
Sure.
And then just, any YouTube consultant will tell you then that the video title and thumbnail are very important
Yeah.
to let people know what your video is about and hopefully to attract them. Obviously, making sure that once they click into the video, you're not spam, it's not clickbait,
Yeah.
where you're essentially lying to them through your title. You want to make sure that Video actually is what the title and the thumbnail refer to.
Sure.
But then I think the other thing is just being doing something that you don't mind, that you like to do, whether or not anybody watches or not. Something you're honestly passionate about, because that comes through in the videos.
For
If
sure.
you're honestly passionate about a topic, people are going to be able to sense that
Yeah.
in
Yeah.
your video. So
And genuine passion's hard to come by, so it's valuable.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think people are looking for authentic. Our world is crazy. I'm in the U.S. You're in the U.K., right?
Yeah, Glasgow, yeah.
And you're in Glasgow. Okay, cool. I want to visit Scotland one day. I went to Ireland a couple years ago, and I was like, now I got to go to Scotland. So
Yep. Let me know when you're
hopefully,
ready, Willie. I'll get the kettle
hopefully I
on.
make it there one day. But we're in the Western world, and each of our parts of the Western world has different types of craziness going on.
Yeah.
And so I can't speak for the eastern part of the world, Asia Pacific region. I don't know. I've not experienced a culture, so I can't speak for challenges over there. But
Mm.
I can say that one thing that is lacking in American culture is authenticity,
Mhm.
and I think people are really looking for authenticity in what people are doing. And I think that's really attracts people. So being honest and authentic, and I mean really honest, not fake honest, right? So
Yeah. Good advice. Very good
yeah,
advice. And I've got one last question just to round it
hmm
off, Bill, if that's okay.
sure,
Um, some people watching today's video will obviously be on their paths as an ambient guitarist, and they will have watched a bunch of your videos already, and they just want to watch another one, and that's part of why we're doing it. But there will be some people here who don't know much about ambient guitar, and this is the first time they've heard the conversation. So for those people, what do you think is a good way? There may be already a guitarist. Let's make that a part of it. What do you think is a good way for them to begin their path as an ambient guitar player?
yeah. So I would say I would say this a little looking into the history of ambient music itself, which is
Mhm.
broader than just guitar, is very helpful because some of that ethos comes from the genre. So as we look at folks that now ambient music really dates back to the 1800s. But as we look at more modern musicians, certainly as we get into the 70s with your Brian Enos and Robert Fripp's and other folks from that community, that's really important, I think, to look at and understand. I'm always a big fan of kind of digging back into the history a little bit
Sure.
because you see how people are informed in what they're creating. Um, I think that's really a good place to start is like, okay, so what even is ambient music? And then as we think about guitar itself, is to look at some of these players over the last 50 or 60 years who have really engaged with electronics as it has become more and more available. And I would even say, going back to the early days of Les Paul and some of the experiments he did with Mary Ford are really important. Of course, you move on from that, right? Because it's a different
Yeah.
style of music. And to be frank, love them or hate them, U2 is, more modern stop along the way where we look at the edges, tonal qualities, and how it affected. I would say, literally all of rock music beyond that, even down to the present.
Mhm.
You can't discount his influence. Now, you may or may not like U2 as a band and their music, but I'm not talking about that. I'm just talking about his tech. Well, maybe not even playing techniques. A little bit techniques, but more the way he built his textures.
Yeah.
I personally, of course, well, I don't think we should discount Pink Floyd
Hmm.
as a band to check out if you're younger and maybe you're not as familiar with them. One of my favorite guitar players also that influenced me was Steve Hackett from the band Genesis, the early
Hmm.
days of Genesis. It definitely heavily influenced me in a lot of ways. So there's a number of entrees. I think for more modern styles, certainly digging back into the history of post rock is a useful endeavor, and some of the early post rock bands, and kind of studying how the some of the guitarists kind of built their textures in the context of the music that they were doing.
Yeah, yeah.
So I'm an old guy, so I kind of go way back. I predate post rock. So to me, post rock is like a brand new style. So I
Sure.
still kind of feel like it is, even though it's been around for 30 or 40 years now.
But yeah, that's a very interesting through line that you just brought there. And I should point out to anybody who wants to know more about people like Steve Hackett that there are 4 or 5 different guitar interviews with Steve Hackett. He's a
Oh,
wonderful.
really?
Oh,
Oh,
yeah.
cool. Yeah.
Bill, I'll give you a bunch of links after this. Um,
So yeah, I would point to his song "Spectral Mornings"
yes.
as one of the quintessential songs of embodying kind of the ethos of ambient guitar. It's not an ambient music song, but it is it's amazing.
It's amazing, and it's a musical description of a soul leaving the body upon death and going into the other world. So,
Exactly.
I mean,
Yeah.
what more can you need?
It's a soaring anthem.
Yeah.
That's the way I think about it. It's
And of
wonderful.
course, anybody interested in ambient guitar, first thing they should do is subscribe to Chords of Orion because it's a fantastic resource. It's a fantastic way to learn and to have fun with the guitar. And I've learned so much from it. And Bill, I could continue to talk to you for hours and hours more, but I think that's about time for us to draw a line under this one. So,
Right. As George Harrison said, all things must pass.
indeed. Beatle
Yes.
George, such wisdom. Well, Bill, thank you so much for your time. I've had such a good conversation with you.
Oh, sure. Yeah. And thanks for having me on. I really appreciate it.